This week, Daniel Corbett from Fastly is with us to discuss the wide world of WAF. Then Andrew Mundell from Sophos joins us to talk about optimizing security investment with MDR. Finally, in the enterprise security news, not a whole lot of funding. Outpost 24 picks up an attack surface management vendor. Private Tech is launched. That's the name of the company. Now you're confused. Redacted goes out of business. That's also the name of the company. Now you're confused again. Pick better names, security startups. Layoffs, hot takes. 80% of boards think they've got security covered and figured out. But then we've got a survey that says only 14% really know what's going on. Mass extinction events, a whole bunch of AI stuff, all that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
Attackers are only getting more proficient, so how can you proactively adapt your cybersecurity strategy? Core Security by Fortra helps you uncover and prioritize the risks that pose the biggest threat to your organization. Core Impact is a penetration testing tool that safely finds and exploits vulnerabilities using the same techniques as attackers. You can conduct advanced pen tests with ease using certified exploits and automations. Take your engagements even further by pairing with our additional red teaming tools from Cobalt Strike and Outflank. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Fortra Core Security. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy National Megalodon Day. This is episode 321, recorded on Thursday, June 15th, 2023. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria. Also joining me is the Czar of Zero Trust, the captain of content, Katie Tytler. How are you, Katie?
I'm well. How are you on National Megalodon Day? I really didn't know what that meant at all.
You don't know what a megalodon is?
I do now.
Have you ever seen, well, you haven't seen the Meg then. You need to go watch the Meg.
I haven't.
It's a fantastic documentary about
a fantastic documentary.
with the one Jason Statham. It's fantastic.
It is. It's a lot of fun. I mean, if for the type of movie that it is, you just can't take it too seriously. It's great. Also piping in there, that was the Baron of Bloodhound, the Pirate King of PowerShell, Sean Metcalf. How you doing, Sean?
I'm doing good. I just got really excited to hear about the Megalodon. So, like I said, the Meg, I love watching the cheesy movies from Sharktopus to Attack of the Three-Headed Shark to Sand Sharks, usually shark-related.
Creature features.
Yeah, the Meg goes right into that. And it's Jason Statham, so what's better?
I didn't know any of those existed. I had no idea any of those existed. So you learn something new every day.
Welcome to the genre of creature features. In the beginning, it was just Godzilla, and it's just really expanded out. For those who don't know, the Megalodon is the, unless something's changed, and since I was a kid, but largest shark in history. Extinct, allegedly extinct. Go watch the Meg, see if it really is.
There is a second Meg movie that's coming out, so because of Meg 2, we have to wonder.
Yep. Yeah, we're always making new discoveries in the ocean. Who knows? Large things lurk in the deep. All right, a quick announcement here. Join us at an upcoming official cybersecurity summit in a city near you. This series of one-day, invitation-only, executive-level conferences are designed to educate senior cyber professionals on the latest threat landscape. We are pleased to offer our listeners $100 off admission when you use code SECWEEK23 to register. That's SECWEEK 23. Visit securityweekly.com/cybersecurity summit to learn more and register today. All right, and for our first interview here, it is sponsored by our friends at Fastly. Today's topic is wading into the wide world of WAF, and yes, I was very proud of myself for the alliteration in that title. We are excited to have Daniel Corbett from Fastly with us today. Daniel is a staff product manager on the security product team at Fastly, who works on the signals and rules that power Fastly's next-gen WAF. Welcome, Daniel.
Hey, thanks so much, Adrian. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you. That video quality is great, by the way.
Oh,
I don't know what
thanks.
you're using there, but it looks awesome.
I have a DSLR. It's a Canon EOS.
Well, it paid off. It's worth it.
Nice.
Yeah, I'll upgrade here at some point, but yeah.
Wow, wading into the wide world of WAF, is that like WWW?
It's a lot of W's in it. Yeah, so WAF doesn't come up a lot in the show. I mean, we tend to spend a lot of time on emerging tech and things like that, but obviously these, this is a pretty standard tool that most organizations have and deploy, and I think it's worth jumping into and talking about, the latest of what's going on with it, new features, new ideas, new technologies. And, of course, the term next gen gets thrown around with a lot of these technologies that have been around through, several product cycles, through several, in security, we see entire startup cycles every like 4 to 6 years. Sometimes people go back and try and reinvent existing technologies. And I think, the product that we have today is was a result of building a WAF with the benefit of hindsight. I think maybe kind of like a second generation of WAFs that said, maybe there's a better way of doing this.
Yeah, that's right. We all know there's a very long history of WAFs. And as you said, most organizations have them enabled in one way or another. But I think that there's always been this constant struggle of managing it, right? Tuning it, constantly dealing with false positives. And as we enter, more into cloud native architectures where applications are being deployed several times per day, in some cases for large organizations, hundreds of times per day, how can what we refer to as a legacy WAF keep up with that, right? Keep up with not blocking legitimate traffic. And what we've seen is many organizations who have a WAF just have it in logging mode. They actually don't even have it in blocking mode because it's causing so much friction amongst their teams.
And just as a sanity check, these days with a WAF, are they typically just putting it in front of websites, or do you guys extend to cover web-based APIs as well these days?
No, that's a great question. Definitely, we're seeing coverage amongst all different application types and APIs. For the Fastly Next Gen WAF, we specifically support what we north-south traffic. That's traffic coming in from the edge or the internet layer into the application, but also that east-west traffic, which is what we're starting to see more usage of within these cloud-native environments. That east-west traffic is typically used for service mesh technology, things like Envoy proxy, so on and so forth, and protecting that service-to-service chatter that happens. So yeah, we're definitely we cover both standard web applications and APIs, but we're also seeing in APIs where that stretches a bit as well, because historically APIs have always been REST based, right? JSON, and we're seeing more and more organizations move into GraphQL technology and wanting to do because it comes with a wide variety of improvements over REST-based APIs. But like we all know, with every new shiny toy that comes out in tech, there's always new shiny attack surfaces, and also some of the old ones as well, right? So
yeah, SQL injection will never die apparently, and now we have. Now we have prompt injection, and we just we see it keep coming up. The research team where I work at Valent Security can't talk details yet, but we just found a vulnerability in a very popular SaaS application where we were able to recover session keys, basically using what looks exactly like blind SQL via the API.
Yeah, I definitely believe it. Like I was mentioning with GraphQL, I have a demo that I run on that shows what's a quote unquote modern application. Now, granted, it's written to be vulnerable. It's actually called Damn Vulnerable GraphQL Applications, available on GitHub. But it showcases how modern applications can be susceptible to SQL injection, like you're talking about, command injection, cross-site scripting attacks, but also even GraphQL specific attacks like recursive queries, and which can cause DOS attacks and things of that nature. And so, yeah, you're right. Some of these attacks are just not going away anytime soon. And we just saw it. There was recently a vulnerability announced within the last few weeks called around a software called Move It. And that also focused on SQL injection, right? And so it's not going away anytime soon.
Do people put you in front of, just random question here, since you mentioned Move It, in front of commercial off-the-shelf stuff as well as their own proprietary stuff?
Yeah, that's actually a really great question, which is why our WAF supports a wide number of deployment options. And that's another thing, like historically with traditional WAFs, usually, I'm going to date myself here, but you go back and you had these big bulky appliances that you throw in a data center somewhere, and they may be in line with the traffic or port mirroring or whatever it may be, right? But then like we've started to see like a pop-up other organizations coming up where, you know, they move the WAF completely to the edge and at let's say the CDN layer or whatnot. But we don't have a lot of organizations who offer or softwares that offer flexibility of kind of doing both of those things, protecting from the CDN layer if you want to do that deployment option, or moving into your environment. And with the Fastly Next Gen WAF, we support, it's like over 30 different deployment options, everything from Nginx and Envoy and HA proxy and Kong, and we even support Microsoft IIS, and then if we can't fit into any of these combinations, we also offer a reverse proxy software that you could just pop in front of one of those technologies that you're talking about, this out-of-the-box software. Maybe you can't extend it. Maybe it has its own web server capabilities that you can't plug into, and you can take our reverse proxy and plug into that. Or, and then as an alternative, we also offer like the edge delivery component, which would like operate more at that CDN layer. So yeah, it's really important to have that flexibility to basically deploy your WAF in the environment of your choosing.
So since we're talking about architecture, maybe it's worth jumping into what a WAF actually is, and even with terms like north-south and east-west, I've heard people with different definitions of those. I think clearly north-south to most people means between your private resources and the internet, whether those are in the cloud or in a private data center. That internet boundary, that edge boundary. But with east-west, I've heard different definitions, like some people define as like, the space between user segments and server segments, or just between different parts of the server segment. So maybe first, let's just jump into the purpose of a WAF and what people are using them for.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the purpose of the WAF is to protect you from what you don't know, the unknowns, right? We all know that there's no such thing as bulletproof software, and no matter how much corporate training happens where folks have to go through these different secure development trainings and practices, mistakes happen. We're all human at the end of the day, and there's novel attacks as well where folks are able to take maybe a very small attack vector and combine it with another one and kind of pivot through vulnerabilities. And so a WAF helps to protect you from these things that you just don't know about today, right? And they come in a wide variety of forms, and some of them are broad, like we're talking about SQL injection and command injection, and there's also log4j attacks, and some of them are more narrow or application specific vulnerabilities. And So WAF helps to protect you from those things that you just don't know about. I mean, if we knew our applications were vulnerable, we wouldn't need to have a WAF. We would just fix them. Yeah. So exactly.
Right. And so so I guess the next question there, like the architecture, you talked about different deployment options, and in the old days, it would just be an inline appliance. Like I remember working at a company, I remember the moment I was troubleshooting something and realized that we actually had 3 stateful firewalls inline between us and the internet, because our old school appliance-based WAF had a stateful firewall built into it, which was managed by somebody on the security team, and then, or maybe the web team. And then we had a application delivery controller that was managed by yet somebody else that also had a stateful firewall on it. And then we had the actual next gen firewall that we used, which was clearly a powerful firewall. So 3 different people to talk to when you're trying to troubleshoot and figure out why something, is breaking or not getting out.
Hope you weren't using NAT. I was like,
no comment. But yeah, let's let's talk about so deployment options, because you can still deploy this kind of inline in that appliance format, right? Mm-hmm. But Signal Sciences was one of the first companies I heard about. Did they call it RASP? It was a different deployment model.
Yeah. Yeah, we have, what we refer to as a RASP integration, but it's just another way to hook directly in, because like you're saying, like there's all these different layers. Like somebody may control the load balancer. You may work on this certain application team. You don't have access to that, or it's difficult for you to get things done over there. And so we offer a plugin capability in a wide variety of languages, from JavaScript and PHP and Java and Python and Golang, and we could plug into all these major languages, and essentially we operate on a module server deployment. And so when you plug in with, let's say, if you're just using Java or something, you can add some code into your Java application, and as the requests are coming in, it will automatically be passing those requests on to the local agent for decisioning of that. But yeah, I mean, we support so many things. I think the most recent one we also came out with was support for running our WAF within AWS Lambda. So, we're starting to see more serverless traction, and so we just want to be wherever our customers and technology is going. And another one that we just, we mentioned architecture a few times, and I think that's an important word, because we've also started entering into allowing our WAF to be run on ARM architectures as well.
So you've been talking a lot about the WAF and APIs, and that's all great. I want to step back for a second, because you're talking about the Signal Sciences history. And of course, Signal Sciences was acquired a few years ago by Fastly. So can you talk a little bit about why that happened, how the company is evolving, and what kind of tech challenges are precipitating or continuing, I guess I should say, continuing to grow the company in this direction?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the history of Signal Sciences is that the co-founders of Signal Sciences were working at Etsy, and as you know, Etsy's a online store, and they were constantly dealing with false positives of their existing WAF solution. Imagine you're an online store, and the variety of search queries that you're getting for products, right? And not only, let's just say, like properly spelled out search terms, but also typos, right? Sometimes folks are, typing something up to search, and they hit the wrong key. Their cat steps on their keyboard, whatever it may be, right? And they were just dealing with a high influx of false positives, and so that caused them to look at.
Also, not to interrupt, but also dealing with such a global company. I think that's a huge part of Etsy's business and a critical part of the traffic
Absolutely.
And legitimate traffic from places like I literally just ordered something from Bulgaria. So that's a huge part of it too.
That's an amazing point, and you're 100% right, because the other thing that comes within that globalness is different spellings, right? And different
character sets.
Character sets. Thank you. That's what I was looking for. And so, there could be words that they just randomly have a single quote somewhere within the word, and that's even in last names and things of that nature. And so, a lot of times with these like legacy WAFs, they would block these things. They're like, oh, there's a single quote in some text. That's bad. I have to block that. And so you're right that with the globalness, it adds an additional factor. And so I think, like we all know, like everyone who's had to deal with a WAF, it could be very painful to tune it and tweak it. So the founders of Signal Sciences set out to create a new way that could help support what they were dealing with. Like they were dealing with this challenge on a daily basis, and so they created a technology that we call Smart Parse. That's basically able to analyze requests and the various parameters and tokenize them and basically do a lexical analysis on them. And so and that helped to basically reduce a number of false positives, because like the way that we look at things, and this is very near and dear to my heart, is that sometimes something can look bad, but it's not a real attack. Right. And with Smart Parse, we're able to make that distinction between something that just looks bad and is actually a real attack. And that's an important distinction because, again, like imagine you're an online forum that answers tech questions, or people can post tech questions. How do you run a WAF on a legacy WAF on something like that, where folks are constantly copy pasting SQL queries or whatnot, right? It gets very, very difficult. And so that's why it's important to kind of understand the context of the request and to be able to understand whether it's an attack or not. But to get back to your question, so Fastly saw the power of Smart Parse and the product that Signal Sciences had created, and Fastly made an acquisition of the product. And we've just continued to work growing it. Some of the challenges that we see is that the threat landscape is just constantly evolving, right? We saw there were a few months back, there was a new JSON SQL injection variant that was released that used all these JSON functions that many folks were not aware of. And so it's just you have to constantly be keeping up. And so we have a lot of internal tooling that we use to help identify these new variants before they get found in the wild, helps us to identify false negatives that could exist, or false positives. And we're constantly tuning and tweaking and improving our WAF to account for those things.
So we have a back channel here, a Slack back channel, and as you were talking about Smart Parse, Adrian sort of tongue-in-cheek said Smart Parse, aka not regex. But that brings up a good question, because everybody uses regex. Why don't more technologies rely on Smart Parse?
Well, it's for one, it's proprietary to Fastly. And so that's one of the reasons. But yeah, regex is a problem. Kelly Shortridge, who works at Fastly, just put out a blog post within the past week called Regex in Retrograde. And it's pretty interesting because one of her analogies basically equates it to someone walking in to a car dealership in a modern era and starts asking if the car has blinders or buggy whips or or harnesses and bridles and they're like, no, we don't have those things because it's a car, and so it's kind of the same thing where it's just like working with Smart Parse in the industry is a bit of a paradigm shift, right? For sure, because when you're used to dealing with regex, listen, I'm a big fan of regex. I've used it countless times, but the reality is when you start trying to construct these very complex rule sets, they can get extremely difficult to manage. And we all know as well that it also comes with processing costs, right? The first question I think that everyone always asks whenever something is using regex anywhere, not even in a WAF, just like within applications anywhere. I've been in many architectural discussions, and it's usually, well, what's the performance hit of using this? Can we use something else? Because there's just performance hits. There's it's difficult to understand and things like that. So Smart Parts just changes things significantly. One last thing I'll just say is, like, a lot of times folks are used to coming in from legacy WAFs that have over 3,000 rules, and they come on to this next gen WAF and using Smart Parts, and they say, where are the 3,000 rules? And it takes a little bit for them to realize. But once they have that aha moment where they're like, oh, wow, like, I don't have to sit here and fine tune and tweak and manage 3,000 rules. That means I can actually focus on digging into the threat data and attacker data and free up my time in a more valuable way.
Yeah, create
Daniel,
every, like, copy and paste. You're creating every possible iteration of, like, one rule with that old system, right?
Yeah, exactly that.
Sorry, Sean, go ahead.
Hey, Daniel, I worked for an organization that had a number of Microsoft IIS servers back in the day when they were being regularly and actively exploited. Microsoft started building in some WAF-like capabilities to sort of filter out the known bad things. So this question is more around WAF best practices. What should companies know before deploying a WAF? And for those who have already deployed a number or some, what are some of the things that they should check for?
That's a really great question. I think that companies need to understand, like, some of the problems that they're trying to solve by deploying a WAF. Like I said, some of it is unknown. In some cases, you just don't know. But I think that when you deploy a WAF, it's important that, I think the number one thing that we all want our WAF to have is visibility and observability. Because if I'm going to turn something on that has the potential to block my traffic, I need to be able to see into that first. I need to be able to build my confidence and to understand that, to understand what can happen if I actually turn this into blocking mode, which, as I mentioned before, a lot of organizations don't have their WAF in blocking mode because they may not have the visibility into it. They may not have the confidence they need to activate that blocking mode. Making sure that you have proper visibility and into what that WAF can do is extremely, extremely important. And then the second thing I'd say that's, like, very important to know and understand is, like, under what circumstances can that WAF block traffic? Like, if I were to turn this on to block traffic today, what circumstances would cause that WAF to block traffic? And that's very important into building confidence as well, because another thing is a lot of, what we would call legacy WAFs, out of the box, they're just going to instantly block attacks. They see a bad thing, they block the bad thing right away. But within the Fastly Next Gen WAF, we introduced the concept of threshold-based blocking. And that allows our customers to get into blocking mode much faster and build their confidence. And so they may start off with some higher thresholds, but they're going to block some things that are exhibiting high volumes of anomalous or attack behavior. And then as they build that confidence around the WAF, they'll start lowering their thresholds and lowering their thresholds. And then they get to a point where they feel very comfortable and they say, this is working great. I could see all the data. I have pure visibility into the request logs and the graphs, and I can see what's going on. We're going to go down into instant blocking mode. But that threshold blocking can give you time to build that confidence without just, wading through logs and nothing's happening, and you're trying to figure out when to enable it and when to not. So I look at, threshold blocking as a way to help you build that confidence into the WAF.
Natural follow-up on that. So artificial intelligence, AI is all the rage. Definitely shifting our thinking around most of the things that we've been looking at, things like that. How does AI break or hopefully improve the web application firewall or WAF? And can AI enable better real-time monitoring of these web calls and block things like SQL injection, like cross-site scripting, et cetera, especially when these requests are masked or even obfuscated?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I've been quite interested in this topic, and we've been discussing it quite a bit with my colleagues. But we definitely think that there's a lot of potential in this space. I mean, we're just seeing that the space is just exploding right now with possibilities. But at the moment, for at least detection, we're extremely confident in the detection that SmartParse is able to bring, and where we see ML and AI plugging in for us is being able to generate these novel attacks, being able to create the obfuscations and generate these novel attacks for us to test our detection engine against them and continue to expand that detection engine, because it's obviously it's hard to see into the future, but I think it's possible for AI, like you're saying, to be able to detect SQL injection and things like that. But we also have to we have to tread cautiously, because it goes back to the scenario that I mentioned before. If you're running a tech forum of some sort and people are pasting, SQL, it would just have to make sure that it's trained to be able to understand, oh no, that's a regular SQL query. That's not actual SQL injection. And it's an important distinction that would need to be made through that. So yeah, for us right now, we're just mostly interested in trying to explore like the attack vectors and payloads that could be generated by these technologies to flesh out our underlying technology.
Certainly. And regarding that, one of the things you mentioned earlier was MoveIt. So one of the things that I find interesting about the AI kind of take on this is, if the AI engine, hypothetically, that's integrated in the WAF, understands the application behind it, so something like IIS that I mentioned, and there's a vulnerability that's released, a patch that comes out that hasn't been patched on that server yet, maybe that AI could automatically know that this is what it's protecting, this is what the attack that's coming out. Okay, I'm going to block this until such time I'm told not to. Or even, you could have different degrees of adjustments where you could say the AI could be doing some more threshold blocking, like you said, around the information that knows behind it. I think maybe that level of intelligence and understanding and context of what it's protecting may help it better. What are your thoughts around that?
I think you hit the nail on the head with the context part, right? Because that was another point that I was going to make, is that like sometimes in the current state, you have to train up the different models and they have to understand the context. And in some cases that could take time for as far as I know, I'm not an expert on this topic, but it could take time as you're continuously doing these new application deploys and things like that for it to learn that context. But if I'm understanding you correctly, I think you're basically saying like, if it was able to learn and understand the code base, that would arm it with even more context. And I tend to agree. But when you were saying that, what I also was wondering is like, if we get to that point, it makes me feel that if it's able to understand the code base and understand attacks coming at it, we're almost at the point where it's going to be able to suggest improvements in the code itself to say, hey, you're not using prepared statements here or whatever, right? And things of that nature. Because I mean, that would be great if we can get to a point where the technology is able to have more context on the actual code. Because like I was saying, it gets more challenging if it doesn't have context of the code and it's just watching traffic and it's trying to learn how that application, the good and the bad traffic, what happens when you deploy something new, right? How long does it take it to understand that?
So follow up to that, Daniel, your bio notes that you work on the signals and rules that power Fastly's next-gen WAF. What does your day-to-day work look like, and how do you determine signals and rules, and how does this like AI conversation play into that and factor into that as well? How do you decide what should be blocked, what is maybe something that should be a threshold? How do you make those determinations to help protect customers?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, I'm a product manager, so my day-to-day calendar looks a lot like playing Tetris. I am jumping around from everything from customer calls, working with sales engineers, having partner discussions, working internally with the engineering teams that I engage it with, and just a whole wide variety of things, offering support internally wherever I can on the part of the product that I'm responsible for. But to unpack like a little bit of what you said, so signals in the next gen WAF is like something that we apply based on analyzing the data. So for example, SQL injection is a signal, command injection is a signal, things of that nature. But we can also add signals if the IP is coming from anomalous sources. And then they also tie into what you mentioned, rules where customers can write their own business application logic rules to do things, block traffic, allow traffic, or add a signal, add their own custom signal because they want to monitor that traffic. They want to see more request logs. They want to see it in the graphs. Now, to answer your question, I think it was, I don't know if I think I don't know if it was intentional, but what you were essentially alluding to in your question, in my opinion, is like product management prioritization. Like as a product manager, how do I prioritize looking at this thing over that thing, or how do we prioritize where certain things happen? And it's a great question, right? We have to look at a lot of factors, and it's interesting. Like I was, we have a prioritization process that we use because in the attacker world, everything is either like, let's just say roughly, good or bad, right? But we can't, working on a security product, we can't always look at things like that. We have to look at things in a scale, right? And so at the top priority, of that scale would be like, oh, did someone discover, are we usually detecting something and we're not detecting it because if you change something, that would be like what we would call a bypass. Or then there's a concept of false negatives. It's like, we've never detected this thing. And in false negatives, there's a scale. It's like, is it something that, is there a false negative from like an off-the-shelf scanner? Is it a false negative from payload obfuscation? Is it I can't go too much into detail on how we prioritize each of those things, but it's basically a broad spectrum of how we have to look at these different things. But to answer your other question around like, when do we decide what to block as a threshold and whatnot? For us, everything that qualifies as an attack signal, which is SQL injection, command injection, traversal, we have a signal for backdoors and SSRF and things like that. All those, like there's log4j, JNDI is another one. Anything that we classify as an attack signal is out of the box threshold blocking, and then customers can add their own thresholds or rate limits on other anomalies or signals that they create.
Thank you for that. That is exactly what I was looking for. So how do companies, we mentioned a lot of these applications get deployed, they're configured, you mentioned cloud into this. How do companies need to adjust their thinking, or do they, when it comes to deploying applications in the cloud? And what does that look like from a web application firewall perspective? And is there visibility that can be provided from web application firewalls that are deployed in, say, Azure, AWS, or GCP, as well as those that are on-prem?
Well, for us, like we don't think that organizations, when they're using our WAF, that they need to change the way they deploy in cloud or on-prem, because we fit into both places. And the unique thing about our deployment options is we fit into both places at the same time. And so let's imagine a situation where you have a website, and part of the website is you're actually working to move to the cloud, but there's a period of time where maybe you have a hybrid deployment, right? And part of the website's in the cloud and part of it is on-prem. We're able to support both of those at the same time with a unified and consistent rule-based inspection engine, all of that, and you're able to see from like a global site view all of the activity and traffic across those deployment options. And so, that allows folks to get observability without having to go, I have to go to this console for my cloud stuff and I have to go here for my on-prem stuff. They go to one place and they're able to manage both of their deployment options. And then the other part is whenever they deploy our next gen WAF, the other thing we notice is a lot of folks start seeing a lot more things succinctly than they were used to seeing, because that's another thing historically and legacy WAFs. I feel like there's like an uneven balance. On one side, you'll have a WAF that's just like blowing up your log infrastructure, blowing up your alerts. It's hard to sift through and parse through the data. Or on the other side, it's just very quiet. There's nothing coming out of it, right? And there's not that balance. And we try to bring that balance by, when we generate alerts, we only generate an alert. If customers configure alerts, we only generate alert on a single event or attacker versus every single thing that attacker sent or came through. And that goes with our observability data as well. We try to present it in a succinct and manageable way that people can get into it and actually understand it and not feel overwhelmed by that data.
Thank you.
So in talking about what kind of feature set distinguishes a next-gen WAF from the more traditional cases that we've been talking about, clearly it seems like smart parse is one of those things. Deployment options and management options is probably one of those pieces. Does it also extend to like protocol support? Like I think you mentioned GraphQL earlier, and you've got stuff like Speedy and HTTP2, where obviously like, I think HTTP2 is like a binary format, like your traditional parsers aren't going to be able to do anything with that, right?
Yeah, it kind of. So like with HTTP2, it's a binary format, but the underlying like proxy, load balancer, whatever it is, generally translates it into an HTTP, a common HTTP structure. And so, behind the hood, behind the scenes, like definitely it's a binary format, but once the translation occurs, you can look at headers the same, paths the same, the method that's occurring, post, get, put, whatever, and the post body. But you're right. Like there's all these other, like, I like to call them sub protocols. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but that's what I personally like to call them. Where these
I understand what you mean. So that,
yeah, and there's like, we can consider REST is one, right? REST could be a sub protocol. There's WebSockets. There's GraphQL. It's again, I'm going to date myself, but you have like SOAP and things like that, and then also gRPC has been coming up, and it's important for a modern WAF to be able to inspect these things, because what I like to say all the time is what starts in development ends in production. I think we all know that, right? And developers these days are controlling more of their end-to-end architecture than ever before. And when they're able to make a business use case for something like GraphQL, which is very easy to make, by the way, because it offers a lot of benefits and cost save, that includes cost saving. One day, a security analyst or security architecture team is going to wake up and they're going to be in a meeting and they're going to be like, yeah, we deployed GraphQL to production. And the security team's going to be like, wait, what? Does our WAF cover that? I don't know. And it's not a good position to be in.
Yeah, definitely. Daniel, thank you so much for being on today. We covered way more ground than I thought we'd be able to today. This is great.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. It's my absolute pleasure.
Yeah, good stuff. And if you want to learn more, you can visit securityweekly.com/Fastly. And stick around. When we come back, we're going to talk managed detection and response with Andrew Mundell from Sophos. When organizations face poor web performance, challenges building modern applications at scale, or need to reduce operational and development costs, they turn to Fastly. Fastly's distributed edge network means your business can unleash its growth potential without worrying about scaling your infrastructure, whether for growth of users, transaction volume, or geographic expansion. Get the speed, security, and edge cloud innovation you need to deliver profitable and engaging experiences. Visit securityweekly.com/Fastly for more information or to speak to an expert.
Business Security Weekly is recorded on Mondays at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Each week, we address the challenges facing CISOs through our guest interviews, including former and active CISOs. Our news segment is focused on leadership and communication to better help security leaders translate and communicate security risks into business risks. Jason Albuquerque, Ben Carr, Tyler Robinson, and others add their expertise to the conversation. I'm Matt Alderman, and I hope you search for Business Security Weekly in your favorite podcast catcher and subscribe to download our latest content.
Follow us on LinkedIn for updates across our organization, show highlights, and more. You can find us by searching for Security Weekly Productions. We're also on Instagram and Twitter and other things. Lots of good little snippets from shows, short audio snippets, video snippets. All right, this interview is sponsored by Sophos. Andrew Mundell joins us today to talk about optimizing security investment, Sophos' vision for MDR excellence. Andrew is a seasoned principal solutions engineer at Sophos. He specializes in threat prevention and investigation techniques, and has been at Sophos since 2008. We don't see that a lot in the industry. A lot of people have been jumping around. Welcome to the show, Andrew.
Adrian, thanks so much for having me on. You're making me do month maths. So I'm a couple of months shy of coming up to 15 years at Sophos, which, as you said, is kind of rare in the industry. But I'm not the longest tenured person at Sophos. I'm beat out by a good handful of 20-year plus veterans. So it's a super interesting organization to be part of.
Joe Levy, has he been there longer than you?
Joe is relatively recent, like coming up to double figures. Joe's our CTO. Okay. But tons of double figures folks. I originally joined Sophos through an acquisition, and Sophos acquires quite a lot of companies. So I often joke when I meet new people coming in from an acquisition of like, I hope you know what you're getting into. You might be needing to get used to this logo and this email address for a good long time.
Right. Yeah. So always good to hear that, and always good to see a security company, where folks stick around a while. That's always a good sign, I think. But so today we're talking about MDR. So this has been kind of a fascinating topic to me because I recall MDR kind of popping up over the last, is it fair to say last decade or so? I think I saw EDR first, and then we started to see MDR, and we do see these trends with acronyms where, we had CSPM and now we have SSPM and DSPM and ASPM for all the posture management stuff. But maybe let's start there, something a little foundational, talk about where MDR came from and why we need it. Why does it exist?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, MDR kind of grew out of EDR. So let's go back to even EDR. Where did that come from? And we've known for a long time in the industry that tools themselves are not the only thing that organizations need to secure themselves. And certainly what we've seen at Sophos through the years is that many organizations started to assume that antivirus was just a checkbox. It was this thing, it goes over here, and if it's good, it stops stuff. If it's not so good, I have to go and clean up. And really, when the industry started to shift towards EDR, there was this kind of realization that a combination of things. Attackers were learning new tricks. They also had different goals. So we saw some significant changes in the types of attacks that were happening and the goals of attackers, moving to things that were more destructive, of course, like ransomware, but also a big uptick in this thing called a long dwell time. So once attackers had found their way into a system or a network, they were waiting for a long time before they kind of did anything that was really noisy. And that's where EDR came in. So it came in to say, let's start from the place of assuming that an attacker has breached our network by one means or another. There are certain things that they're going to do that are just part of how they need to operate. If they're trying to encrypt some files, they're probably going to want to figure out, where do some of those files sit? Where's the most interesting location? What's my deployment methods that I've got easy access to internally? And by looking at all of those things, it gives us a really good chance to jump in, detect, and that's the D in EDR, endpoint detection. So we are looking for those activities, not necessarily blocking them. And I'm sure we'll dig into that a little bit more, but that's kind of the interesting piece. So when EDR first came out as this kind of new protection layer, it was only detection. There was no protection or prevention. And those words get really complicated and really tricky, because a lot of the time, we talk about, this AV scanner detected this virus. So we're kind of reframing what detection means, and typically detection now means we saw some behavior, we observed some activity, and we are telling a human being about that, so that human being can go and take the necessary investigative steps. So that's us up to speed with EDR. And what that meant was these EDR vendors, and Sophos is obviously a long-term EDR vendor as well, they were having to say to the customers that they were talking to, this isn't this set and forget thing anymore. You actually need staff. You need human beings 24/7 by 365, even on holidays, to be able to respond to all of these signals as they come in as close to real time as possible. And it turns out that's really expensive for most organizations to fully staff a 24/7 by 365 SOC. With all of the right tooling, you're getting into complex things like building your own detection engineering and how to manage that huge amount of data that you typically have coming from a significant number of sources as well. So we saw kind of two different approaches come out from the MDR space. One was vendors, so Sophos, CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, organizations who have software that's already out there on agents and can perform some of those other tasks, the threat protection type tasks. Naturally, those vendors said, well, we've got threat researchers, we've got fantastic teams of people who really understand what attackers do. Let's figure out how to deliver that as a service. So that was kind of group one. The other group were typically vendor agnostic. So they would say, by whatever means, whether it's we'll build some collectors in your environment or we'll manage your SIM for you, and we'll look at all of that data coming in, regardless of what tool set you have. If you're using Sophos or Palo Alto or Cisco for your network firewalls, we'll just take all of that information and we'll look to build the normalization, the alerting and the detection engineering, and deliver that as a service. So that's kind of where it came from, and that's where we started to look at how can we try and bridge both of those gaps. But hopefully that wasn't too long, and that was a useful kind of quick history lesson for us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting, the story behind, I remember back in the day, I was an industry analyst actually covering endpoint security. And, I remember when there were a lot of complaints about EDR, about, the fact that there was a D there, but not much of an R. The response piece didn't have a lot there. Like at the most, maybe you could isolate a machine or something like that, or you could take these very drastic measures, but it wasn't very flexible in terms of how you would respond to the things that you actually found. But yeah, certainly detection engineering is a huge challenge. And I think that's one of the areas MDRs can provide a whole lot of value here. Running the SOC, just the warm body problem alone, 24/7, 365, doesn't even get into the difficulty of just researching new types of threats and building detection engineering for that and testing it and making sure it works. And I assume it looks like Sophos, you have a whole research team that's just kind of, is that Sophos XOps, the team that's dedicated to just coming up with discovering new threats and kind of building the first versions of the detection engineering that goes into the MDR service?
Yeah, Sophos XOps is kind of an umbrella function. So it covers three main areas. It covers our Sophos labs. That's the real brains. That's where we are day in, day out. We're triaging millions of individual files, billions of data points and events to really understand what can we do to build that proactive detection. That's one thing that we're particularly proud of. We have always had very strong proactive protection in our agent, and we continue to believe that is not a losing battle. I think we've definitely seen some noise elsewhere in the industry. I'm sure even just a few years ago there was so much buzz of antivirus is dead, and we definitely disagree with that. Threat protection is still good. It's still valid, and ultimately, it's a filter. It's a really reliable, high true positive, low false positive filter to remove the need for a human being to need to look at a lot of very simple stuff. So that's one bit of XOps. The other is our engineering teams, who then take that knowledge from labs and who actually build the tooling to implement those kind of new rules. And we're always looking at how can we make that more efficient, and what can we do to reduce the amount of time it needs from one of our analysts in our labs to say, okay, I've got a thing that I want to protect against. We want to reduce the amount of time that takes to go from the brain of the person in the lab through all of the appropriate QA and actually get out to proactively protecting our customers. And then the very last bit is the real front line. That's our day-to-day MDR analysts. Sophos XOps is about 500 people strong globally, and we have over 200 MDR analysts looking through those additionally billions of other events every single day. And those are the folks who are right there on the front line and seeing real world things as they happen. And we actually brought those, it was Joe Levy, our CTO's idea to bring those three groups together to make sure that they could act as a single organization. So again, removing friction, removing the amount of time it takes for someone in our MDR operations team to see something bad happen and figure out why is that happening, to get the data to labs to figure out how do we stop this sort of thing from happening again in the future where possible. And I'm sure we might have time to get into some of those different things that attackers are doing that sometimes make prevention really difficult.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. That's as we're kind of it's a small army, 500 people. But as we're kind of getting the outline, the understanding for what MDR is, what it's comprised of, how you do it. Sean, I think you've got a good question here. That is going to help us kind of lay the foundation and shape the conversation here around how attacks evolve over time.
Sure thing. So, hello, welcome. Appreciate you being on with us, Andrew. Sophos has been in this space for a long time, as you mentioned. How have you seen attacks evolve to evade detection, and how do security companies, specifically Sophos, need to adapt to detect and block these attacks more effectively?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I would break it down into a few different elements. The one that is the most simple to think about is attackers are always trying new things. And what they started to see was they had significantly more success when they used native tools and standard applications. So a few years ago, what we would have typically seen is an attacker would attempt to breach a network in one means or another. And typically, the first thing they would look to do is try and install some sort of remote access agent. Well, that's new software. Often it's freshly compiled. Maybe it's a Cobalt Strike beacon, or even if they're just using, Meterpreter to create remote access. Those things are relatively easy to detect because a brand new, just compiled binary that has a really low reputation, that's relatively easy to put some rules around. But if they're starting and if they have the ability to run PowerShell or run C script, W script, that's much more difficult. So attackers started to realize if we use some of that tooling that's already there on the system, it's harder to evade prevention. They also use legitimate applications. Our clone is a favorite for data transfer. It's a really efficient command line interface to a number of different storage providers. That's really, and it's a completely legitimate application. And then for remote access, sometimes we're seeing just AnyDesk, LANDesk. These, again, completely legitimate apps get installed. So I think that's definitely one element that's made it more difficult to proactively stop some of that stuff. Whilst in the Sophos tooling, and I'm sure in other ones as well, you can absolutely go in and say, we want to block all PowerShell. You would also lose a lot of fans from the administrative function who probably live in using PowerShell for deploying configuration. So that bit's particularly tricky. The other thing that we've seen is there's just so much opportunity for attackers. And I would break that into two different areas. The first is the amount of time that it takes for a new zero-day exploit to be published. From that to an attacker being able to find some POC code and find a vulnerable system, that's a really short amount of time. There's utilities out there like Shodan that are fantastic defensive tools, but can also be abused by attackers. Log4j, proxy shell, proxy not shell, all things which had easily auditable elements remotely. So that kind of pipeline of here's a new exploit, here's some proof of concept code, let's go and just search the entire internet and see what our potential pool of attack systems might be is really easy. The other element is on that same thing of ease. A lot of the complexity that typically came with that would come with defining your operation, choosing which strain of ransomware, setting up your your cryptocurrency wallets. So many of those things are now provided, and I chuckle because it's so weird to think of cybercrime as a service, but you can go to a collection of different services where you can start with buying some initial access. You can go and buy credentials, buy exploits. You can go to another service and have them deploy and define for you the code that you want to run. Do you want to discover documents across the network? Do you want to look for IoT systems? Do you want to just recon and see where are all of my domain controllers? And right over to not just the execution part of ransomware, so getting files encrypted, But the whole payment element as well, and negotiations and dealing with decryptors, so much of that is accessible to a very unskilled attacker. It's probably so easy that even I could do it.
Completely understand. So one of the things that you talked about is comparing new executables, new things that you haven't seen before, to using PowerShell. Certainly, I've heard the block PowerShell and your problems are solved. I disagree with that. And the other part of it is what is PowerShell actually doing, and is PowerShell getting run on a system where the person would never open PowerShell? They're maybe an executive assistant, so they're in Outlook and Excel and PowerPoint and Word all day long and would never open up PowerShell. Certainly, that looks unusual. How do you adapt to attackers using these existing tools on the network, often referred to as living off the land? And I think really what you've been talking about is about confidence levels. Higher confidence for brand new executables that have shown up that you haven't never seen before, or known attack tools. Maybe lower confidence with these sort of living off the land techniques and using existing system admin tools. How do you figure out what the confidence level is when you see certain tools are being used? Are you looking at behavior analysis? Is there some other components that use it? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Sean. Thank you. I think there's two ways to think about that. God, I'm numbering everything today. I apologize. There's two different ways to think about that. The first is the way that script, be it PowerShell, Python, Perl, C script, W script, whatever this, even actually batch files and command files. And obviously, we're talking about Windows a lot. Shell scripts over on Linux and the Mac as well. Same principle applies to all of those. And the first thing that we can look at is what's spawning this script, what's causing this script to execute. A really simple example, which Microsoft have done a good job of really locking down, is kind of a classic embedded macro in an Office productivity document. So typically you would have, at its most simple, some just command shell script in there. You could even be deploying some fairly complex PowerShell. I think the amount of size you can include in your code strings there is fairly generous. So that's a really good starting place for us to say, what's causing PowerShell to start? Is it parent process? And we use that kind of terminology quite a lot, parent process and child process. So is a parent process of Word, is a parent process of PowerShell something like Word? That's definitely unexpected. In fact, we think that particular case is so high confidence severity, we actually block that behavior by default. So that's relatively easy for us to look across those things and say, let's just block certain behaviors where we see this code being executed. And the nice thing with that is it doesn't have any dependency on looking at the script. That could be as simple as PowerShell IEXing a URL. If you're trying to load PowerShell out of Word, we can just shut that down. It gets more interesting, though, to that next step of, well, what if PowerShell is just launching by itself locally? Someone's just typing in PowerShell, or it's maybe PowerShell is a child of another PowerShell process. That can happen a lot as well. So for that, there's a couple of good things. And again, thanks to Microsoft, one of the things they've implemented in the operating system is something called AMSI. It's the anti-malware scanning interface. What that does is that says to the processing engine, to PowerShell or to cmd.exe, the thing that's going to run this, instead of just executing that and giving it straight to the application, there's a little placeholder in the middle. So what we're able to do is divert the actual code. So the code that's going to run, we can divert that and send that into a threat protection engine. And that's enabled by default on every Sophos system. What that means is we don't just get to make a determination about the file itself, the .ps1 or the .bat file, but we actually see the contents. So we can say, okay, when this script runs, it's going to IEX a URL. It's going to attempt to run to run a memory dump that may have credentials inside of it that we can access. It's going to go and download some other stuff from the internet, and we can correlate those URLs. So we get a couple of really good chances at scripting kind of even before it does anything. And then the final piece is, like you mentioned, behavior. We're looking at every single command, and some of those commands we're able to say outright block. Some of the other things that we look for, though, are definitely more in that gray space. And the way that we surface that to our customers is by giving a Sophos risk score. So to go back to our example earlier from rclone, rclone is kind of right in the middle if it just happens without anything else happening. So that might be a 5 or a 6 out of 10 risk score. What gets really interesting, though, is not just seeing rclone fire and generating this detection with a 6 severity score, but it's understanding, well, how did that come to start? What was its parent process? Was its parent process PowerShell, and had previous shared children of that same PowerShell process? Had they downloaded stuff from the internet? Had they tried to do other things that may have been proactively blocked? So when we're seeing those individual detections, we're also looking at it from a scale of everything else that's gone on. And again, sorry, in Sophos parlance, when we see enough things that make us concerned that a human being should really start investigating, we promote those individual detections, those correlated detections, into what we call an investigation. And that's the first thing that we send out to either our customers who decide to use our because EDR is now XDR. Sorry, Adrian, to throw another updated acronym out there, but in using our XDR product, or a similar mechanism for alerting our own analysts that, hey, the behavior we've seen has now gone this far, and we need to get a human being in there to look at it.
That makes a lot of sense. As a security consultant and researcher at heart, I've used PowerShell a lot for security checks and hacks and testing out exploits. I remember when Microsoft released AMSI, and I actually tracked for a while which antivirus and security tool companies were incorporating AMSI in their products. And uptake on the AMSI signals took quite a while, but I was glad to see that most did this over time. And certainly, eventually, I stopped tracking it because it seemed like everyone was doing it. So in the information security or InfoSec space, we hear a lot about EDR evasion or tool evasion. Often this means obfuscating or reducing visibility so the associated alert doesn't escalate to an analyst or even automate a response. What are you doing in order to gain better context into attacker activity to provide better alerts and response, which can include blocking malicious activity, sort of this automated action that happens? And what other signals are you incorporating into this to get better context and understanding and confidence, such as network events, et cetera?
Yeah, that's really where MDR can become incredibly powerful. So, and a little plug, little kind of additional tidbit about the way that Sophos is operating our service. Earlier on, I described that there was kind of two approaches to MDR. Typically, you had vendor centric, and then you had vendor agnostic. We've taken the decision and the pathway of going right down the middle of that, which is kind of interesting as a vendor in that space. But for our MDR customers and coming later in the year for our XDR customers, we offer integrations with any other security product. Whether you're running Palo Alto on your network, Okta for identity, Microsoft Defender, applications out in the cloud, whoever your email provider is, even whoever your endpoint protection is. So if you're running, and I won't list any more vendors, if you're running any of those other vendors, we can still take all of that telemetry into our SOC on your behalf. That's as complicated as it sounds. And one of the really complicated things there is we have to spend a lot of time figuring out different risk levels and different alert levels, because when Palo give us something and say this is a high severity alert, they may use a scale of 1 to 10, and when we get an event from a different vendor, they may use high, medium, low. So we have to look at all of that schemas for every product. We need to look at whether that data that we're getting indicates something that's, we call it being actioned versus unactioned. So for instance, when a firewall says, my IPS saw this inbound packet and blocked it, that's still a really interesting piece of data for us. But it's also interesting to know that that's what we would consider to be an actioned alert. So the security product took something, it did something with that. So those are useful. Unactioned alerts are also really useful. So we want to bring all of those in, and we need to normalize that. So what we did was we actually built wrapped around the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and thanks so much to our colleagues at MITRE. They do fantastic work for giving the cybersecurity industry this common language that we can use to talk about breaches and talk about attacks. So we design our own schema, and we map everything that we could possibly get from all of those vendors into our schema. We also filter and parse that for things that we call entities. So an entity is, you can think of entity as the object, the target, the thing that's of interest. It could be an IP address, a computer name, an email address, a user account. We then also ask our customers to help with business context, because it's really easy. In my test environment, my web server is called web server. So it's really easy for me to look at my console and see, oh, I've got an alert on my web server. I should not isolate that from the network because that's my web server. But it's more difficult in production environments. So we ask our customers to help us help them by giving us business context of what are your business critical systems, who are your VIPs, and all of that stuff feeds into the pipeline that we go through for all of our data processing. Sorry, that was a lot of context. I'll mention one other quick thing, which is that's quite a lot to do. That's a good amount of work that goes into bringing all of that stuff now in a normalized way. What that lets us do is run analytics of various different kinds. Of course, there's ML, of course, there's some heuristics and simple matching in there as well, for us to say, we can now look for patterns that involve those entities. And that's really where it gets interesting. So we're using that concept of entities to be able to correlate similar things that we're seeing from different places out there on the network.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so continuing in this vein, talking about all the collaboration you have to do with customers to understand context around their assets and things like that. You also mentioned earlier on you're not necessarily going to block stuff, and I imagine that is a similar conversation with customers. And I imagine it's different. Some customers say, okay, if it meets this criteria or if it's dealing with these assets, we want you to go ahead and maybe block it, take care of it. Whereas other customers, don't block anything without contacting us first. Is that the case? Is that how that conversation goes? Do you have, when you're triaging an alert or something like that, I imagine you have a system where you look up and it has notes that say, here's how the customer would want to handle this.
Exactly. At its most simple, we start with defining what we call a response mode. So during our initial conversations with customers, we can essentially say, we've got a few different ways that we can work with you. At the most basic, if we see something suspicious or malicious, we'll go and investigate that and write up for you everything we saw, everything we did, and give you a series of recommendations. That's our notify tier, as we call it. No one uses that because you're just paying for alerts that you probably have already and a little bit of investigation. So the next option that we have is we literally call it collaborate. Same thing happens. So we see something that's of interest, a human being carries out an investigation, sends that same email. This is what we saw, this is what we've done, these are the implications of it. These are our recommendations on our next steps. We want to work with you to do those. You can delegate that access automatically, and you can move over to our kind of full management tier that we call authorize. So authorize says, whatever is in your power, Sophos, and we have a list of the things that we'll do today. I'll mention a little something about that in a second as well. So here's a list of the things that we can do today. Blocking files, killing processes, terminating certain network connections, isolating the entire system, sending samples out to our research teams, all of that kind of stuff. You can, if you want, say, Sophos team, do all of that. So now you get that same start of the email. These are the things that we found. This was the investigation that we carried out. And finally, this was the tasks that we did. Now, sometimes there might be things left over. So we might need to say to a customer, we really think you should block this user account or disable its force a password reset. Same for some of the things over on the network firewall side of things. If you're not running a Sophos firewall, which is managed in the same platform, then go ahead and Mr. or Miss Customer, please add these items to your block list on your firewalls. What we're planning on launching a little bit later this year is to take that response action menu even further. So customers will also be able to delegate to our team the ability to do things just like that. So we'll be able to, on agreement, say, you have the ability through secured and audited APIs to block user accounts, to add things to block lists across the network, to in email things, to maybe quarantine certain emails if you're convinced that they've been related to a particular situation. So we're really excited about that next step of really being able to go beyond, honestly, what we actually hear of any MDR vendor, whether it's kind of vendor-based or vendor-agnostic, nobody else, as far as we know, is going into that level of enhanced response action. So we're super excited when that comes along.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that's a great place to wrap here. Just understanding the different options that customers have. The levels of response. And honestly, I've been hearing the term MDR for over a decade now, and I think I've got a better understanding of what that means from this conversation today than the totality of all the other information I've heard over the last decade. So it's been a really good conversation. Thank you.
Much appreciated. Really kind. Thanks so much for having me, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Yeah, make sure you visit securityweekly.com/Sophos to learn more. There's some links in the show notes to research from XOps. They have some very well written, very entertaining posts there, some great research. And we'll be right back in a few moments with the weekly enterprise news. Do the words free time or relaxation sound foreign to you? Perhaps you've been stuck in the office too long, battling cyber threats or worrying about the next strain of ransomware. Let Sophos help provide peace of mind 24/7, 365 with cybersecurity delivered as a service. Because we want you to get back to your weekends, family dinners, and everything in between. And you'll get there with Sophos. Visit securityweekly.com/Sophos to learn more. The cybersecurity landscape is full of single solution providers, making it easy for unexpected cyber threats to sneak through the cracks. That's why Fortra is creating a stronger, simpler strategy for protection, one that increases your security maturity while decreasing the operational burden that comes with it. This is all possible thanks to Fortra's best-in-class portfolio and deep bench of expert problem solvers. Fortra's integrated, scalable solutions help customers face their toughest challenges with confidence. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Fortra, Fortra. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Join our Discord channel to chat with our hosts, ask questions, customize live stream alerts, and more. Visit securityweekly.com/Discord to receive an invite. And I also post stuff in there during the while we're interviewing people. If there's some kind of reference somebody brings up, I'll go find the like the article from mentioned earlier today from Kelly Shortridge, Regex and Retrograde. I posted that in the Discord. You can find that there. And for the Enterprise Security Weekly news, you can also go to our show notes at securityweekly.com/ESW321 if you want to follow along there. Check out those links. All right, we now have Mr. Tyler Shields joining us. So all four of us are here. And it's time for the news. Howdy, how you doing?
I'm doing good, thanks.
All right. I think I mislabeled this first one. I think this is an acquisition.
The Black Point, it says growth round, and it's listed in some of the announcements as a Series C or quasi-Series C.
LinkedIn says they have 132 employees. It's like $1 million per employee. Over.
That would be amazing.
It would be amazing. Their headcount growth is 45% over the last 6 months. Who's been growing at that rate?
It's a good 6 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, but what are the numbers behind that? Is that 10 to like 18, or is that 100 to whatever the numbers are above that?
So last 6 months, that would be so this time last year they had just under 80 employees. They haven't quite doubled that.
But MDR company, and you guys just got done talking about MDR, right?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, over the last year, they've added 80%, 87% to their engineering, 100% to biz dev, 50% to sales. Yeah, I guess they're growing pretty quick, but I don't know. Okay, Series C, maybe for a services
it's
company.
a little weird though, because their previous rounds were 7 and 6, and then to jump to 190.
Yeah,
and it's Bain.
It's Bain.
I mean, it's not.
Thing.
I know it's not that Bain, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know how this works. It's just the numbers are just telling me like, how do they throw that kind of money at them and not own them? I don't know.
Good question.
All right. If you have any insight into that, just hop into my DMs. Let me know. Let's see what else here. So I think this is number 3 is a French company, Elba. We've seen a lot of these user-focused or employee-focused is kind of a trending phrase in cybersecurity.
Yeah.
And reminds me a lot of push and nudge security, which are kind of competing with the company I work for, but kind of not, because they're PLG focused. It's like they have a free tier. You can just jump in there, start using it. Doesn't have not a whole lot of feature parity with what we do, but they do give you some good visibility into what's connected to your SaaS accounts.
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing a fair amount of this kind of human-centric approach, or this focusing on the humans and the employee security posture, which I don't know how you really quantify that. I'm still kind of trying to figure that out across the board. Like, what makes something a employee security posture? Is that just like their ability to handle phishing or something like that? Like, I'm not sure exactly what that really means.
So for us, the idea is that a lot of your SaaS is managed, like your Salesforce admins don't even sit in IT, right? Like a lot of your SaaS admins, like who owns Gong, right? Like it's not somebody in IT. These are people just into business. So you need to get them kind of roped into security operations type stuff, right?
Yes, yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, I've seen a few pitches that are kind of different around some of this stuff, like getting your employees back to actually contribute to feedback loops on security risks and things that are occurring in real time. Then I've also seen pitches that are, employee-centric around, being a newer version of like a know before or something like that. So there's just lots of different definitions of what that could be. So I'm seeing a lot of it come in.
Yeah. That's pretty good though, Katie. Push, we've got the back channel going here. We're talking about push, nudge, and elbow. Push, shove, and elbow.
Push, nudge, elbow, kick, and scream. We can name all of
I am going to make you, like cybersecurity, practice good security hygiene, whether I have to push, shove, or elbow you out of the way.
Yeah, it kind of escalates. Like there's the gentle nudge, then there's the push, then there's scream security. You just scream at your employees open, and it's like Harry Potter, like you can receive the letter that's what was it called, a howler, and the letter literally screams at you.
Maybe that should be
opens,
security's
becomes
next
a mouth
tactic.
and starts screaming.
Use your freaking password vault.
Yeah, really.
I only want that if it comes in your voice, Katie.
Oh, that would make
great.
people use it to make it stop.
I've always wanted road instructions that berate me for doing the wrong thing. I've always thought that should be a feature, where Sam Jackson is just yelling at you for being an idiot and taking a left when it said a right.
Press the turn, you dummy.
Yeah.
My fiance swears on his life that his GPS once yelled at him after he was going verbally ballistic on another driver and told him to please stop using that language.
Come on.
Oh, wow.
Spooky. I was not there, but he swears on his life that he was told, please don't use that language while driving.
It's listening.
Rage detection. That's great. Yeah, I mean, we've got all the driver aids now that like check to see how tired you are. Like literally there's a camera, infrared camera watching your face, watching your eyes. So it's only a piece of software away. We're so close. Yeah, we got an acquisition here. So hadn't heard of the company, but Outpost 24 acquired an external attack surface management company, Sweepatic. But there's a ton of these. Attack surface management is fairly easy to put together with open source tools. So we've seen a lot of these popping up, and there's a lot of value in knowing the gaps, the stuff you have exposed to the internet that's going to hurt you. So I kind of like seeing this. I like, any kind of vulnerability management vendor makes sense for them to have this. MSPs, MDRs makes sense for anybody who needs to be aware of threats, right?
Yeah, the whole EASM market was interesting. I felt like there was a bit of a roll-up that occurred 2 years ago, maybe a year ago, something like that.
Yeah,
18. Yeah, well, I don't remember back them up, and they started to get picked up left and right, and then that kind of left pennies on the ground, I guess, at some point, right? And I'm not sure if any of them left that are getting picked up are worth it anymore.
So a couple years back, I created a thing called Security Weekly Labs, and we did product testing. And the first category I did was external attack surface management. And going back, you can still find that on semagazine.com if you go to research and then Security Weekly Labs. And just looking at the list, I reviewed 9 products, and Bit Discovery was acquired by Tenable. Psycognito is still around. There's I don't think they've been picked up. I don't know if AlphaWave has been picked up. AminoWeb is a Swiss. Yeah, AminoWeb is a Swiss company. They're not getting picked up. Intrigue went to Mandiant, and then Mandiant went to Google. And Phobos was like an independent. They're mainly a services organization, so I'm not surprised that hasn't been picked up. Rendori was picked up by IBM, and RiskIQ was picked up by Microsoft. So roughly half of them got acquired.
Yep. Question is, are there any good ones left?
There's still new ones coming out. I advised a couple companies that are still in stealth with theirs just in the past couple of months. Because I did those product reviews, like these kind of late to market folks will get in touch with other founders or will find my stuff and get in touch with me, and I'll have a phone call with them. So yeah, they're still popping up. What's still brand new ones that haven't come out yet.
Like, what's really the space left open for differentiation in that area?
I think the biggest differentiation there, they're ones that just scan internet stuff. I thought the most interesting thing about the market was were the products where it didn't depend on you to put the correct input in. Like maybe you put a typo in a domain name, or you put a typo in an IP address range or something like that. I've actually seen this happen quite often in enterprises. Or you just don't know about ranges that your company owns. Like some of these, like I remember back when Equifax got hacked, I was doing some research on how much IP address space they owned, and it was like 80,000 publicly routable IP addresses they owned. Like that's a lot to monitor. It's easy to miss some of that stuff. And what I called seed discovery, nobody uses that term. They all have their own terms for it. But the idea is you just put in the name of a company, and they'll figure all that out for you. From the name of the company, they'll link that to SSL certificates. They'll link it to domain registration and who is. They will look at business records. And if your company acquires another company, they know they should probably start scanning that new company that you just acquired. So they'll go all the way down that rabbit hole and follow that thread as far as it goes. And yeah, you're going to have to go in there and manage it a little bit and, prune it a little bit maybe. But they will, in every case I've seen, with a company that's been around for any serious amount of time that has any significant size, they're going to find stuff you don't know about. Let's see what else here. So I have a little bit of a rant about company names. This is a common topic for us, but there's a new company called Private Tech. And so of course, the first thing I Googled, like there were no funding details, or there were funding details, but not a link. I needed somewhere I could link to that mentioned the funding details. So like an idiot, I Googled Private Tech funding.
There's 80,000 links that you'll never find anything important on.
More like 80 million. It's impossible to Google this company because their name is a very common term that people will enter into search engines. So they're forever going to run up against this. And though it's sad that Redacted is apparently going out of business, we talked about them when they came out of stealth on this show, and we were giving them a hard time then for their name because the first round of press releases that came out, I actually got irritated that they wouldn't share the actual name of the company and we didn't cover them. And eventually I realized, no, Redacted is the name of the company. And it's like stylized with brackets on either end of the word redacted.
Yeah, that's the first thing I thought when I saw Private Tech was, is this like a distant cousin to Redacted because it's about as good a name?
So I'm thinking, like, is it possible they're going under because they couldn't raise money because everybody ignored their emails because they thought the name of the company was being redacted and not shared? Like, you only want to take clever so far, and then being clever just hurts you, I feel like. Or maybe the name is less relevant than I think it is, and I'm just going on a rant.
Well, that's possible too, but it's also possible that the amount of thought and consideration that they put into their name is reflective of the amount of thought and consideration they put into their tech.
Zing. Shots
I say
fired.
this knowing absolutely nothing about either redacted or private tech.
Well said, Katie. That is definitely something to take into account also. So yeah, that was number 6, and where's the other one that? Number 12 under shutdowns. So yeah, we have both a layoffs and a shutdown section in the news this week.
Shutdowns is scary,
and not a lot of fundings. So this is kind of a dour week for the news, and we don't usually see as many layoffs and shutdowns announced as fundings and acquisitions. So there's some bad exits. The other one is I'd never heard of Apora, but that's the other company we have going under shutdowns. It's an Israeli company that does what? I don't actually know what they do.
What number is it?
It is number 11.
Apora. I've never even heard of such a thing.
Opora's software works outside the networks of a particular organization to detect potential cyber attacks targeting the organization well before they occur. So, okay. So we were talking about external attack surface management. There's actually kind of like a subset there. It's like reputation management, that kind of thing, where they would actually look for indications that somebody's setting up phishing infrastructure targeting your employees. Or maybe like, you suddenly see a fake app in an app store with your brand name on it or something like that. So,
didn't
ZeroFox
do something similar to that for a while too?
Yep.
And
so that kind of falls under
so well for them in the public markets too, as they're trading on pennies right now.
Yeah, they actually had a good week though. They had a good announcement where if you look at the security funded newsletter, they had a pretty positive week. They are now trading for significantly more pennies than they were last week.
All right.
I mean, it's still like $1.11 a share, but they're doing better.
Yeah, they're at $1.17 after hours.
Yeah, so digital reputation protection, I think something like that was I forget the exact acronym, but I consider it like a part of external attack surface management, like recognizing when somebody's preparing to attack you. Those little fingerprints that they're starting a phishing campaign. Or other attacks. So yeah, layoffs, Expel. Speaking of MDRs, managed services, security services company, from everything I've heard, word of mouth, one of the better ones out there. So kind of sad to see some layoffs there, but if it means the company survives. Dragos also announcing layoffs. And there are at least 3 or 4 other companies where people have privately mentioned to me that there were layoffs. I haven't seen any news stories on it, but if you go to LinkedIn and you look at the insights, you can see the drop in employees. So it's not exactly something you can keep secret when LinkedIn basically tracks the movement of employees. But there's a lot more layoffs than we're showing in the news segment here, or in the show note.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, specifically, like, how you treat these layoffs, I think, is so important. And I haven't read the entire details on the Expel one, but I would not be surprised if Dave and Justin and team didn't take care of their folks. But in kind of the quick skim I did, every departing person's offered a 2-month severance and paid COBRA throughout the end of the year. So that's a good 6 months of COBRA. That's a meaningful help, given the fact that they're doing layoffs because they need to save money, right? So the ability to find that looking out for their teammates, I think, is super important.
And I think the tone from the top is it really does say a lot. And while it's unfortunate that layoffs and firings and all of these things, restructuring, have to happen at some points, I think it says a lot about the company if the person at the head of the organization is taking some personal responsibility. You know, I did read the whole Dragos announcement, and he says right out there, this is on me. I am the CEO, and whether he did things right or wrong, that's not really relevant here at this time. The amount of empathy you have for your employees and the ability to hire back when the market gets better.
Exactly, Katie. You got to hire back at some point. Yeah, I mean, you don't want to leave your employees in a lurch. You
don't want to leave your employees in the lurch. And if it gets around the industry, we're a big industry, but also a small industry in a lot of ways. Yeah. If it gets around that you treat your people poorly when they're on the way out the door, people are going to know.
They ain't going to come back in.
No.
Yeah, and this one as well did something similar, right? So they did 2 months of severance, so same severance, but they only did 2 additional months of COBRA paid for. But what they did interesting was waiving the year cliff for vesting, which means that if you had been there 6 months, you instant vest 6 months, right? So you don't have to wait for your 1 year cliff. And instead of keeping people at a 90-day holding period till they 90-day allotment until they have to buy their shares or lose them, they're extending that to 12 months, which is very, very beneficial for the employee base as well. So they helped in other ways, but again, they were trying to find ways to help their employees as much as they could in difficult times.
And I just think I've heard of other things also behind the scenes too, where the CEO or the hiring managers have basically blamed the employees for things going wrong, blamed every department as it comes up, and not taken any personal stake in it. And that's not a good look for your company. And word is going to get around one way or the other. And whether it's not being able to hire back or having potential prospects hear about this second or third or fourth hand, it's going to come back on you. If you are an executive at a company who can't take any personal responsibility, even though the economic environment is bad, we all understand that. There are things that are somewhat out of our control right now. But if you are an executive of a company, especially if you have a C in your title, and you don't have, I mean, if you're saying it, you should believe it. But if you're not even saying it, that's horrible. And if you don't even believe it in your heart of hearts that you could have done something different, maybe you can't save everybody's job. But if you don't think you're at any fault, if you're at one of those companies, I say run.
The number one thing I learned when I started working for startups is talk to somebody who's either worked there before or worked with those same founders or people before accepting a position. And I'm not going to be specific. If I'm too specific, people might be able to work out what company I'm talking about. But one of the co-hosts here with me right now helped me avoid going to work for a company that, after I heard about the executive's behavior, I just had no interest in going to work for. So, yeah. Absolutely. Like that's both the number one thing you can do before joining a company and the number one reason you got to treat your employees right, regardless of how dark the situation or how pissed off you are. It's going to affect your future ability to acquire talent and get back to growing the company when things get better, if things get better. Moving to a more positive story here. If you guys would click on number 7, the Apple new privacy and security features. A lot of good features in here. Like a lot of them aren't groundbreaking, but I got down to the sensitive content warning section there. If you want to like search on page for that. And it's just so simultaneously, like, it's a great move. It's about time that you have a feature like this, but at the same time, you know, I know exactly why this feature exists, and it's kind of sad that it has to exist.
Being female, it took me a little longer to get there, but I read the section a few times and then I went, oh, that's what he means.
This feature's not for us, Katie. This feature this is proportionally, I'm sure, happening more to you and other women.
Okay, maybe I'm just naive, but it took me a little while to get there, but I finally was like, oh, yeah, okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Ashley Madison, you know.
But yeah, it's yeah, I mean, it's kind of nice that we've gotten to this level of polish, you know, that you know, if only we could get there for the people who work for like social media companies who have to do, you know, the kind of sensitive content work, you know, that they're still getting traumatized on a daily basis, but at least the average person can avoid some of the garbage, you know, that ends up in your feeds, on your phones, that kind of stuff.
I could even see AI bots quitting from that when they're hired to do those jobs. Like, it's awful.
I do wish it came on more than just Apple platforms, though, right? Because I think it's also a situation where we have a unique situation because we have hardware all the way up through software kind of in a single lockdown ecosystem that allows Apple to do some more advanced protections that may not be able to be implemented other places. And the trade-off for that is you are locked into their universe, right? And so I wish we could see some, and I haven't read all these. Maybe these make sense in that context, and maybe they don't. But, you know, conceptually, I wish this were options that we could see in Android and other places quickly as well.
And for folks listening who are still scratching their head, I'll just sum it up for you. Apple now has an anti-dick pic feature. It's the simplest way to say it. That's what it is.
It is. Yep.
And it's sad that it has to be there, but it's also good that it's there.
So for all those who like sending it pictures of Richard Milhouse Nixon, that will be blocked as well.
Exactly. There you go.
No, nobody's going to complain about that. That's an acceptable trade-off, in my opinion. All right. So my company has jumped on the bandwagon. We added generative AI to our product. But I'm pretty excited about it because it's it's an area where I feel like this is how we're going to see a lot of it used. I think it's kind of similar to how I think Orca was one of the first ones I heard of that added it, and we're building it in a similar way. But it's all those workflows where you end up, somebody shows you an alert or a finding, and the next thing you do is you open up 10 tabs to research that alert or finding. And we're trying to cut down on that, have generative AI pull in all that information, summarize it for you, so that you don't have to, it doesn't just ruin your focus and workflow to have to open a bunch of extra tabs and go do that research. So not the sexiest use case, but something that is going to save people tons of time, I think.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm actually really happy to be seeing AI pop into a lot of the cyber tools and systems and workflows that we use. I think I think we're living in a spot where the large data sets are just growing so fast and so astronomically that AI over the top of it makes the most sense that we've ever seen before. Even if you discount the advent of the modern generative AI and just say, hey, the data sets that we have are so big and so broad and so deep, we just can't consume it without an automated system. So it's nice to see it coming into play.
So I had a hot take last week that blew up a little bit. I saw that Forbes had created a top 200 list of the most secure companies, and that just kind of struck me as a bad idea to put 200 companies up on a pedal and say,
challenge accepted? Is that what you're thinking?
What's that?
Challenge accepted? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, what's happened every single time, Oracle Unbreakable? What's happened every time a company or an individual has challenged the public on getting hacked? HB Gary. It doesn't end well.
Remember the old Oracle from in the early 2000s?
Yeah.
I think it was when,
Unbreakable.
Harry, whatever her name is, said that they were unbreakable. Like that lasted like a month.
Well, they had a whole Unbreakable Linux campaign, and it was more about availability than it was about security. But still, it wasn't a good look for them. They didn't come out of that looking very good. But,
and what's interesting about this is they actually say how they rank. And so they say ranking was based on a variety of factors such as network security, potential malware exploits, regularity of patches, the robustness of the company's cybersecurity team, and companies must have had at least $1 billion in 2022 revenue and no breaches since January 1st, 2022. I found this list to be very interesting. I was glad to see, or I guess smiled when I saw some of our own customers on it. But it does kind of beg that question of what is the purpose behind a list like this, especially when they start naming CISOs at each of these different major companies.
Well, and somebody's already pointed out, number 61 on the list, Cisco, the food delivery company Cisco, SYSCO, not the network services and software company, already had a breach. And they announced it back in May. They announced it 35 days before this list went public. So already the list is wrong. So it's just and they're selling awards for it. So if you scroll all the way to the bottom of the that top 200 list, you can can buy basically like it's like a merch store for being on the list, basically.
Oh no.
Well, maybe at least the CISO. Maybe at least the CISO at one of these companies can be like, "Hey, I put it on my performance review. Got named on the Forbes, top 200."
They absolutely will. They absolutely
that's great
will. So
until you put on your performance review the following year that you were hacked too.
Well, what a
so
sad
negative, Tyler.
The cutoff is less than a year ago. The cutoff for having a disclosed breach
was it?
Isn't that what you just said? December 2022?
January 1st, 2022. Yeah, I think they're looking at 2022 and into obviously the first few months of this year. I can understand that if you go back too far, you might have to adjust who the CISO is or who, I don't know. Nothing's perfect. I don't think the list is a great idea. I think it's problematic at best, and I agree with Adrian in his tweet. Basically, this seems to be a Hey everyone! These are the best, most secure companies in the world, and many may take that as a challenge. Many may have already stepped up to the challenge. To Katie's point, maybe they're already there. We have to assume breach in a lot of organizations.
If I have the time, I already have the spreadsheet started. I may start a tracker for this.
Oh boy!
Yeah,
try and keep track. See what the outcome is. Might be because it's a small sample size. Yeah.
I was gonna say, if you really want to get extra spicy, Adrian, put that list up, put all 200 up there, and then just put a time to exploit number there, days to exploit, and it'll turn into a freaking leaderboard. People will be like, "Oh yes, I win!" It'll gamify it. It'll be bad.
A Deadpool.
Yeah,
great.
Exactly. You can bet on it. Sounds good to me.
Yeah, I don't want to dance on the failures of others, but it's at the same time I don't know. Yeah, you should celebrate your successes, but not like this. It's just the wrong way to go about it, I think.
I wonder if they contacted these companies, and in particular the CISOs, before they published the list.
I can certainly find out.
I think I read so everybody invented.
So the sample size I checked with is fairly small, but from at least 6 of these, I know that they were notified. They weren't asked if they wanted to participate or not, they were notified that they were going to be on the list.
Yeah, because I just have to wonder, if this went to a PR person, you might get one response. And
and if it goes to the CISO, a different one, right?
Right.
Yeah, a lot of the responses to my tweet were, can I pay to not be on this list?
Exactly. I would think if I were in a CISO position, I might have to think really long and hard if I wanted my company on this list, and if I had the ability to claw it back, I might.
Yeah.
Like, just your job as a CISO isn't to be like, hello, we're safe. It's just, stay under the covers a little bit and do your job.
Yeah, I mean, even starting a bug bounty, like, you want to make sure you've got all your ducks in a row before you do that, because that's going to attract a whole bunch of attention. I mean, you're basically saying, also come hack me. So yeah, part of the joke here is, they just got, all these companies just started a bug bounty, basically. Because people are going to get curious. They're going to go look. The other hot take here is we had an RIP metaverse story last week. This week, it's actually a book review of a book that kind of goes through the history of cryptocurrency. But ends up being a fairly comprehensive takedown of cryptocurrency and blockchain. So that was it's an interesting read. It's definitely pretty one-sided in terms of their opinion of the both the industry and the technology.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think we all fell for a little bit of that craziness. I don't know that I fell for the Bitcoin becomes the next cash of the universe commentary, but I certainly fell for the compute on the chain, non-argumentable, non-reputable, whatever the correct terminology is, to say that it's auditable and nothing can be changed on the chain itself. And then the ether concept of contracts, right? Smart contracts. That stuff excited the hell out of me, but never got us anywhere. Just never got us anywhere.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just the simple fact that, mistakes are forever now. Theft is forever. There's no undo for a lost wallet. Consumer protection can't exist, by definition. Yeah, it was a huge problem. It wasn't built into it.
Yep, absolutely.
I think for the rest of our kind of downer news, Crunchbase has a list of startups that failed in 2023. That's number 15 here. And then we've also got number 19. A startup mass extinction event has begun. You can't see it clearly yet, but it's going to be bad, from Business Insider.
That was a hard read.
Yeah.
It was a hard read.
I think it's inflammatory. I really do. I mean, I think there's going to be a bunch of deaths, no doubt. Like, you're going to see them kind of start to fizzle out and not be able to get funded. And, I think when you overheat, you overcool, and the pendulum's going to swing back just as hard as it swung forward in 2021. It's going to swing to the other side in 2023. And yeah, we're going to see a lot of them just fizzle out and die. But the good ones won't, right? The good ones will remain. And, your robot pizza delivery garbage raising $500 million, that's going to die. Right? I mean, we could have predicted that a long time ago. But the good ones, or at least the reasonably good ones, will remain good. And they'll come back around. I describe them as the phoenix that will rise out of the ashes of what we're about to see happen in the second half of this year.
But I also think that through no fault of their own, a lot of employees, I'm not talking about the executive teams and the leadership teams and the higher ups.
Oh, it's definitely their fault.
Well, but they're going to be fine no matter what. And there are going to be a lot of people who came in, not just to cybersecurity, but tech in general, and now their livelihoods depend on it, and they're going to have a really, really hard time. And I think the fact that VCs have been allowed to go unchecked for a really long time, because they're not going to die. They're not going to be the ones who are hurt. They're betting on some companies rather, failing. I mean, that's the equation. It's just math to them. So they're going to be okay. The executives are going to be okay, but they're going to be just like 2008. A lot of people in lower level jobs who are going to take quite literally years to rebound.
Yeah. Well, there are some other items here that I think are worth checking out. Mark Andreessen's next big essay that feels like it's maybe at the same level as Software's Eating the World, called Why AI Will Save the World, is on our list this week. But I want to jump down to the squirrel story. We're going to a little bit shorter news segment than usual today, but and it's an AI squirrel to boot. French tax officials use AI to spot 20,000 undeclared pools. Get some extra tax.
This is brilliant. They use image-based.
Who had this on their AI use case bingo card, right?
Oh my gosh. The system developed by Google and Capgemini can identify pools on aerial images and cross-check them with land registry databases. Launched as an experiment a year ago, and 9 French departments uncovered 20,356 untaxed pools.
And not surprisingly, it is a 30% margin of error. Not only was it mistaking solar panels for swimming pools, but it was failing to pick up taxable extensions hidden under trees or in the shadows of property.
That's right in line with government work, right?
Yeah, good enough. 30% error, whatever. We'll figure that out later.
Well, you send the tax bill and see what happens. I guess that's the approach, right?
Right. It's kind of like reverse insurance. Like you assume that they owe the money and let them fight it, right?
Yeah. The government will say, "Prove to me you don't have a pool. Come over and look at my backyard."
Yes. Welcome. I will roll out the red carpet. I mean,
it's a trampoline. It's not a pool.
It's a really big trampoline.
And it's red.
Yeah. Bloody pool? I don't know. Somebody get injured?
That's maybe you have an algae bloom. I don't know. Do you get taxed if you can't use it? If it's not well taken care of? I don't know. But yeah, I thought that was funny. Interesting use of AI. We're going to continue to see stuff like that, and I'm going to continue keeping an eye out for, some unanticipated outcomes. Some
an upside down squirrel is upsetting.
All right. Anything else? Any other thoughts from you guys before we wrap here?
For me, I love the squirrels. The squirrels look great on the screen.
I agree. And we got a new hot take graphic today also that works with the new 4-up display that we're doing for video. So thanks to Sean for that, Sean and Gus for all the work they do behind the scenes. And thanks to Katie. Thanks to Katie, Tyler, and the other Sean, the Sean that you're seeing and hearing, for joining me on today's episode.
Absolutely.
Big thanks to everyone watching or listening to this week's episode, and we will not see you next week.